Well, welcome everyone to today's AllTranstek webinar titled HazMat Regulations 101. I am Eric Starks, Chairman and CEO at FTR, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to be able to bring you today's webinar. As a bit of house cleaning, I want to let you know that there will be a webinar replay available this Friday, July 28th. An email reminder will be sent once the replay has been posted. So the format for today's webinar will be formal remarks from our speakers. This will then be followed by a question and answer session. The length of this webinar is scheduled for 1 hour. All of the formal remarks will be completed within 45 minutes or less, so this will allow us time for Q&A. Now let's move on to the formal presentation. So for that today, joining us is the distinguished Dave Ranzani. Dave is the Director of Railcar Regulatory Compliance. So Dave's team performs quality assurance audits, regulatory support for car owners, for shippers, and for repair and new car facilities, as well as implementation of QA and non-destructive testing programs. Of note is that Dave is the current chairman for the AAR Task Force for Non-Destructive Testing. Another distinguished transport expert joining us today is Gino Smith. Now, Gino assesses shippers' compliance for 49 CFR requirement, and he's responsible for DOT HazMat training. Prior to joining AllTranstek, Gino worked at a naval shipyard, Amtrak passenger train service, and the AAR. So thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Eric.
So why don't we just jump right into the presentation, and should have everything handed off to you.
Okay, so this is Dave. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get into the HazMat part, I'd like to just give you a bit of an overview about AllTranstek, about who we are and what we do, if you haven't really heard of us or know a lot about what we do. But we're certainly one of North America's largest railcar management and consulting companies. Although we don't own any cars, we manage over 275,000 rail cars, which is quite an accomplishment. Of those 275,000 cars, and with our technical group, we have over 100 customers and we manage some of the largest privately owned fleets in the country. So our technical services group provides a full range of technical and operational support to the rail equipment supply chain. We do such things as field inspections, engineering, regulatory compliance. We have two programs that we really work with, Shop Watch and Stencil Watch. We also do non-destructive testing, training, and other regulatory compliance issues regarding non-destructive testing. We also have a strategic services group. They offer a 360-degree view of the rail supply chain in order to broaden clients' view of the competitive marketplace via market research, analytics, forecasting, and strategic consulting services. So today we're going to be talking about HazMat, but there are a number of other departments in AllTranstek that are beneficial to car owners, shippers, and car manufacturing and repair facilities as well. So in addition, there's four main groups that make up AllTranstek. Our Fleet Management Services group, which covers railcar maintenance management, tracking and tracing, shop repair bill management and audits, lease review, in-plant operations. Our Technical Services department covers railcar inspections, regulatory compliance. Again, our two of our big programs, Stencil Watch, which is a program that helps a car owner meet regulatory requirements as far as car owner responsibilities under a wide range of regulations. Shop Watch is our program where our technical group performs audits on behalf of a car owner at repair facilities. And again, non-destructive testing, engineering services, and a wide variety of training programs. Our client services group covers data management and administration, systems and engineering, AR, billing and financials, and a number of other items. Our strategic services group covers strategic planning, market sizing, analysis, segmentation, customer analysis, voice of the customer, fleet asset management history, and in addition, a wide variety of things related to what you need to know to manage your fleet as far as information is concerned. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Gino Smith, who's going to focus on HazMat regulations.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Welcome, everyone. Today, the outline of our today's discussion is going to be a couple of items. But first, it was training requirements for facility employees. We're offering tank cars for hazardous material for shipping. Some common NAR fines and penalties that Dave is going to elaborate on, a little more, pretty extensive, but AllTranstek's approach to HazMat training and assessment, and improving compliance via training and safe practices. Okay. First thing we want to look at is, where do the regulations begin? For shipping or offering any package for transportation, 49 CFR is the mainstay and is one of 50 titles set by the United States federal government. What does this include? The 49 CFR is a principal set of rules and regulations issued by the Department of Transportation and Homeland Security regarding transportation and security. There's certain subsections specifically apply to hazardous material safety in transportation. So basically, any facility that's going to offer HazMat for transportation basically needs to have 49 CFR as their main foundation. And it's very difficult, almost impossible, to offer HazMat for transportation without a good standard regulations to stand on. Okay. Highlight the next slide. All right. Okay. The parts of the 49 CFR pertain to certain HazMat employees and training. The U.S. government says the regulation requires that HazMat employers must train their employees as specified in 49 CFR 172 subpart 8. But what does this really include? Section 171.8 gives you the definitions of out of 49 CFR, specifically designate persons who qualify as HazMat employee. The first person who employs someone who transport HazMat in commerce, they must be trained and tested. Causes HazMat to be transported in commerce as well, and designs, manufactures, inspects, etc., a package used to transport HazMat in commerce.
And Gino, as we discussed earlier, the last bullet point there really focuses more on manufacturers and repair facilities, whereas the first two bullet points focuses more on shipper requirements.
Okay, great. The employee training requirements, it says in part 172.700 and 702, indicates that a HazMat employer shall ensure that each one of its HazMat employees is trained in accordance with the requirements of the subpart. AllTranstek goes in, and subpart C includes, and we actually teach the employees, number one, 172, about the HazMat table. How do you identify and classify this package for transportation? And then 173, we follow up to make sure that the package has been identified, but how is it packaged and offered, prepared for transportation? And both of these two here, two subparts, basically are the main heart of any shipment for transportation. Now, 179 and 180, as Dave alluded to, basically talk about the. Let's go ahead.
Well, more of the design and, of course, qualification and maintenance required. So I know today we're mostly talking about shipper requirements, but we just wanted to mention too that even if you're not a shipper, if you're a manufacturing facility or a repair facility, parts 179 and 180 apply to you as far as manufacturing tank cars, design of tank cars, qualification and maintenance of tank cars. So those facilities that even may not handle hazardous materials still fall under the requirements for training because they're working with the hazardous materials package. But again, today we're focusing on shippers, part 172 and 173.
So when do your employees need training? Okay, each HazMat employer, whoever offers HazMat for transportation, whether a bulk or a non-bulk package, is responsible for training and educating their employees in the regulations that pertain to their job function. And what are exactly the requirements for training an employee? That HazMat employee must first receive the applicable training and testing at least once every 3 years. Now, the employee or employer, excuse me, has the option to do an annual or biannual training, but at the end of 3 years, that training must be completed. A new employee, HazMat employee, who has not yet received training may work up to 90 days with a trained employee. That means they can secure the package, but they're not allowed to certify or sign any documents until they've received this training. And training and testing must be properly documented. This is one area where we see a lot of the regulatory compliance individuals come in, and they do a snapshot for inspection at certain HazMat employee facility, excuse me. And what happens is the FRA or DOT or whoever else, they'll come in and do a snapshot, but they won't go through the full HazMat compliance for that particular shipper. Whereas when AllTranstek gets an opportunity to come in, we go from A to Z to make sure that everything is documented, whether it's checklists, shipping bill of lading, haz waste manifests. We go through from A to Z to make sure compliance is met. Okay. Okay. One of the requirements for 49 CFR Part 173.31, in addition to the training, is examination before shipping. No person from any HazMat shipper may offer for transportation a tank car containing hazmat material or a residue of hazmat material unless that person determines that the tank car is in proper condition and safe for transportation. And that includes all residue packages. And what I mean by residue is that a tank car is in, it's unloaded, and it's put back out in the transportation, but it has not been cleaned and purged. So that particular package is now treated as a full load, and it must be placarded based on 49 CFR 173.31D. How can shippers use this regulation? This is designed to assist the shippers of hazmat materials in meeting or exceeding the regulatory requirements to ensure that tank cars are safe, secure, and in proper condition for their interchange journey to their many destinations. The minimum requirements indicate that each person offering tank car must perform an external visual inspection. That means everything located in 173.31D, 1 and 2, must be adhered to by that HazMat shipper. So AllTranstek can help the shippers, many shippers there, by providing assistance to shippers by educating the hazmat material employees to understand the regulation and teaches them how to identify a non-compliant condition of the shipping package. With this being said, there's many different avenues that can be utilized by the shipper. One is actually a checklist or a document that mimics 49 CFR to the letter. Hazardous material employee is paramount to the success of any shipper that offers hazardous material for transportation. The knowledge and skill of the hazmat employee performing the loading and unloading operations and examination of the tank car before shipping is essential to ensure that a tank car is in compliance before being offered for transportation. AllTranstek has the ability to come in and provide that information, provide that training, but also educate all the employees to make sure that the package is successful in its journey. Okay, we do this by creating a checklist. One of the questions is, do we need, or should I say, is a checklist required? Well, what does the checklist do? It's designed to ensure that the shipper performs a proper inspection of each tank car, and inspection is recommended for use by the loaders, unloaders. But in addition to this, the general visual inspection, it comes from 173.31D, as I indicated before, examination before shipping, and it requires any condition that makes the car unsafe for transportation, missing or loose bolt fasteners, ensure full tight condition, and multiple other items. But the checklist is very essential. FRA comes in, or DOT, or whoever regulatory agency shows up, they're going to ask, how are you documenting this package for transportation? And this is one of the key factors that they're looking for. Okay, right now we're going to shift to the NARs, and then Dave's going to take care of this.
So I'm sure many of you or all of you have heard of NAR, like a non-accident release. So a non-accident release is often caused by inattention at the loading or unloading rack, by someone not performing a proper inspection before offering the car for transportation. So according to the AR, their definition of a non-accident release is a hazardous materials NAR is the unintentional release of a hazardous material while in transportation, including loading and unloading while in railroad possession, that is not caused by a derailment, collision, or other rail-related accident. So obviously, as a shipper, everybody wants to be able to keep the product inside the package. And although an inspection doesn't cause a non-compliant condition, the inspection that's required is there to find these non-compliant conditions. So as a loader or unloader, you know, what can a person do to help reduce NARs? Well, for the most part, those personnel that are performing that function are working with the valves and fittings on the car. So their focus is going to be on the valves and fittings. And some of the common NAR categories that cause NARs are leaky or faulty valves, valves not completely closed, gaskets that are deteriorated, loose fasteners, and a number of other items. So these are the types of things that your loading and unloading rack personnel can identify if they perform the proper inspection, which is certainly aided by the use of a properly put together checklist, so that they don't forget one particular item or two particular items. They have something to go by in hand for each inspection. And so items that can cause NARs can typically be identified by properly trained personnel using a checklist applicable to that particular car type and loading or unloading process. So we found that although many items on different checklists across a different variety of shippers and products being shipped are the same, there is some uniqueness based on the car type and the processes that you use. And so having that detailed checklist specific for your processes is certainly helpful in making sure that the car is compliant before you put it out into interchange. So how are NARs tracked? Well, multiple NARs from a facility may lead to an audit or inspection by FRA personnel. Basically, you get on their radar by having a repetitive problem. So NARs are documented on Federal Form 5800.1, and data, including company name, car number, circumstances of the release of the hazardous material, is reviewed by FRA personnel for possible further action. So just like the FRA tracks trends in the number of NARs for car types, the number of NARs for manway covers, for example, the number of NARs for different valves and fittings on both general purpose and pressure cars. Another trend that they would be looking for is a number of NARs coming from the same facility. So that puts the facility on the FRA's radar, which may trigger an on-site inspection at your facility. And that audit or inspection performed by the AAR, may lead to additional violations that could include a monetary fine. And so some of the fines that a facility can see when things don't go exactly right are stated in 49 CFR Part 209, which is Railroad Safety Enforcement Procedures. And as some examples, and just a few excerpts from that section, 209.2031 says, the maximum civil penalty for a violation is $182,877 if the violation results in death, serious illness, or severe injury to any person, or substantial destruction of property. 209.2032 states, a minimum of $471 a civil penalty applies to a violation related to training. Now that doesn't seem that much, but I have a little bit more information coming up. And also, when the violation is a continuing one, each day of the violation constitutes a separate offense. So it is possible that under the right circumstances, the FRA will consider an ongoing violation day by day, and the penalty that they assess accumulates day after day after day until the issue is resolved. So 49 CFR Part 209 Appendix D is a penalty assessment guideline. It's not something that is absolute. There can be variances in this depending on circumstances, but it's a guideline. It gives us something to look at. It gives the federal inspectors a guide to go by. But for example, in that table, Appendix B, general failure to train hazardous materials employee, $7,500. So in the previous slide, I mentioned the paragraph that said $471. The fine of $7,500 is probably more realistic on what a company would receive for failure to train hazardous material employees. And if, for example, you had 10 employees that were not trained properly, it's realistic that your fine might be $7,500 times 10, or $75,000. So failure to inspect the car and the car leaks hazardous materials. The recommended fine in Appendix B is $10,000. A leaky car where product, including just the fumes, comes in contact with a human being, $15,000. Unloading a tank car without properly displaying caution signs, or blue flags as we typically call them, $2,000. And there's a variety of, there's a bigger explanation in the appendix about shipping papers, but to keep it simple for today's discussion, a minor problem with your shipping paper might see a fine of $2,000, whereas something that's considered a major problem with the shipping paper might constitute a fine of $15,000. So the documentation, not just the inspection, but the documentation of your package and its shipment is taken very seriously by the FRA.
Couple other things to add, Dave, about the shipping paper concern. The individual that's signing off on the shipping paper must be certified. But some of the inspectors have come in and asked, questions. Do you understand some of the components of the shipping paper? And some of the questions, some of the answered responses was, well, I know what this one means, but I don't know what this one means. And that's where that back up to that 471, excuse me. That's the beginning of the fine. But they start asking questions, but they see, training from CBT training where this individual received 100%, on their test. But when they start asking questions, the dots don't add up. So that's where training versus education definitely will prevent these fines and penalties from being assessed.
So not only do you have to show that you've been trained, because you have to be trained and that training has to be documented, but during an audit, the person also has to show knowledge, not just a piece of paper saying that they've been trained.
Sweet, absolutely.
All right, with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Gino.
Thank you, Dave. So, with that being said, the hazardous material training program, from AllTranstek, they are specialized to your commodity, car types, loading, unloading processes, as Dave said earlier. We teach your employees how to recognize non-compliant conditions before the car is offered for transportation. Also, we customize inspection checklists to ensure that each trained employee performs the inspection as expected and required by the federal regulation. So basically, we come in, we help you build a checklist, but we make that checklist specific to the commodities that you're offering for transportation. And this also applies to whether it's a tank car, cargo truck, tank trailer, intermodal. All of these have specific checklists that can be designed to make sure you meet or exceed the compliance requirement. And this program, bragging on ourselves, our industry-leading personnel can review your hazardous material shipping program to identify gaps in the regulatory compliance and the best practice applications. We provide a detailed report based on the assessment that will give you suggestions well, not suggestions, but options to correct your program, and also assistance provided to improve your program to increase the safe transportation of your product and meet regulatory requirements. HazMat employers who realize the true value of AllTranstek programs provide the employee a much broader understanding of their responsibility and accountability to their company and see increased safety levels with their HazMat shipments. The HazMat industry can only benefit when the individuals at the facility level understand the importance of regulatory compliance, the significance in reducing NARs, their role in reducing violation, and generally that their actions can create safer transportation of HazMat and commerce. So, what are the results of an improved regulatory compliance program? It's going to be evident by the condition of the tank cars being released into transportation and the general overall reduction of NARs each calendar year for many commodity and car types. Basically, if employers get back to the basics and by investing more time into the main foundation of every hazardous material shipper, the employee safer HazMat transportation will be realized. So our team can assist the shippers in many HazMat capacity, conducting an on-site assessment, assisting the shipper with correcting any regulatory or best practices gaps identified during the assessment. We provide classroom training and testing for HazMat employees in compliance with federal regulations. So we do face-to-face, provide hands-on training for tank car inspections, exceeding the requirements of 173.31D, examination before shipping. And we also create an inspection checklist or checklist for use by loaders and unloaders specific car types and commodities. Once again, that HazMat classroom training, it's really face-to-face. We just interact with the employees, allow them to ask questions. We just basically take our time and make sure they're not trained, but they're taught. And also, we can provide the same services for HazMat shipper utilizing, as I said, highway cargo tanks, ISO container, non-bulk packaging as well. AllTranstek has dedicated a lot of time and effort and resources to our HazMat shippers in both the U.S. and Canadian markets. Okay. We provide compliance support to corporate locations as well that provide oversight for their shipping locations. When utilized at the corporate and facility locations, the AllTranstek training assessment process ensures a greater continuity and seamless transfer and sharing of all DOT compliance requirements.
Well, Dave and Gino, thank you very much. That was really informative. Really appreciate you taking the time for walking us through that. It's now time for you to ask your questions. You can simply type a question into the question pane on the GoToWebinar sidebar. While we give you a moment to start formulating some of your questions, I do want to let everybody know that the FTR conference is once again happening in September in Indianapolis. Registration is live, and we now have over 70 speakers and panelists who are already booked for the event. So for those of you who have attended in the past, just to let you know, we do have some exciting changes, and for those of you who have not attended, these events are fantastic. You'll have wonderful time of being able to network, talk to other peers, but you'll get tons of content and information. But we are going to be hosting on Tuesday afternoon what we call Freightology. These are going to be these 20-minute TED Talk style presentations, and we're really going to be talking about transformative transportation, topics on what's happening that could transform the transportation system over the next 5 to 10 years. So plan accordingly. Make sure that you have plenty of time to get in there early Tuesday afternoon. Finally, I do want to let you know that we have sold out hotel rooms at our host hotel. So don't worry, we were able to secure more rooms at an adjacent facility, so you can get a room. But I do suggest that you sign up as early as possible, and if nothing else, make sure that you get your room first before you sign up. So take a look at the website ftrconference.com. So let's move to our Q&A. So Gino and Dave, you talked about the requirements for a checklist. That the way I understand it, it's not a requirement. It is really more of a guidepost, and say let's make sure that you don't run into any problems. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, Eric, you did. So that's a correct statement. A checklist, although not specifically required by the regulations, has really become a key point in facility personnel being able to properly perform the inspection, but it's also a way to document that you did perform the inspection properly. The car was in a compliant condition when it left your facility, and so if anything happens between your facility and its destination point, you have a document that says that as a shipper, you did what you were supposed to do. It's a good way to document that inspection, although it's not specifically required in the regulation.
Can I follow up on that then too? Because it's if you or somebody on this call and you are saying, okay, my list does not look exactly like your list, or it's slightly different. Have you run across things where people have said, you know what, I think I'm good, and they didn't really vet it very well, and then in the end it created problems? So I guess what are some of the things that people think, I'm okay? Should they really be paying attention to when they're putting that list together if it doesn't look like the one that you guys had on the screen?
Well, Eric, this is Gino. One of the foundations for building a satisfactory and a good checklist is always revert back to the regulations that require the inspections. So what we try to teach people is go to 49 CFR and pick the items that are applicable to you, and you build a checklist. But because there's so many commodities and so many types of packages, one checklist would be different from each checklist based on the components and the commodity that are being offered for transportation. So you always start with the basics, Eric, which is 49 CFR, 173.31D, examination before shipping. And also, the next section behind that, D all the way to G, asks you, how are you preparing that track for you to perform your inspection? So if you incorporate those two sections on a checklist, you will have everything you need to ensure that the package is protected properly, but you're meeting the minimum requirements that the regulatory people ask that you look at before offering that package for transportation.
So I'd like to add one thing there, Eric, as well.
Please.
I think it's common, or I see that it's common in facilities that I go to, depending, of course, on the car types they're using, but it is common to see one checklist specifically designed for general purpose cars and a separate checklist specifically designed for pressure cars. And of course, you can throw other car types in there as well, like an acid style car.
Okay. Makes sense. Slightly different topic. It's possible that you address this, but are placards required for all tank cars that are being offered for transportation?
No.
Okay, that's an easy.
Like you would want to, but placards are based on, they're identifying the condition of that particular package, whether it's a bulk or non-bulk carry. And placards tell you, but it also tells the responders what type of material that tank car is carrying or package. And basically, when you do not have placards on there, on your package, that means it's an empty package, no longer has HazMat in it.
Or it's a non-hazardous material product.
Absolutely. Okay. It was not carrying any HazMat at all.
Okay. Well, but
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like put the placard on. Don't just standardize, and that way there's no questions.
Well, one of the ways, if you stand and watch a train go by, if you get stuck at the crossing, you'll see a lot of tank cars go by with no placards on there. But
Right.
They're still carrying commodity, but it's just a non-hazardous commodity that they're carrying.
Okay. And it makes sense.
Yes, sir.
So there's a little bit more of a detailed question here, specifically on eye bolts for a manway. So when it comes to eye bolts for a manway, where's the tolerance found for, say, cupped washers and missing tack weld safety stops? So in this particular question, he goes on and says, as a NIT League code, there's really no definition defining the non-compliance, or maybe he's just not finding it in the field manual. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, that's a great question. That is a very real-time question and a very real problem today for a lot of shippers. The FRA is enforcing things like cupped washers, damaged threads, even manway eye bolts that might be mixed in nature, such as a square eye bolt versus a square nut versus a hex nut. So For the washers specifically, there really is no criteria that we can find that is stated in either the federal regulations or the AAR requirements. If you want to, the only thing in the research that I've done, the only tolerances that I can find for a washer were manufacturing tolerances out of the ASTM standards. And so that's probably not realistic to apply once the car has been in service. So this is one of the things that we find it difficult for a shipper to comply even when they want to comply, because there is no clear-cut requirements in the federal regulations right now. So we hope that there will be some in the future, but there is not right now. It's not addressed in the field manual or in the AAR C3 manual, for example. And I will mention one thing along the same lines I mentioned, square nuts versus hex nuts. That actually is in the C3 manual, Appendix D, but it's an inspection that applies to a car when it's in a repair facility for qualification of the service equipment, not necessarily when the car is in a shipper's facility, although I have seen the FRA enforce that while a car is in the shipper facility as well.
Great, thank you for that. Another question here is, what are the regulatory requirements for tank car? Where does it fall for protection? So for the FRA and OSHA have been bouncing this back and forth for some time. Does it fall under OSHA now?
Yes, it's under OSHA, and it's kind of sticky. But if you're out in an open area, OSHA has reverted back to railroad. They shifted back to the railroad, and there is no requirements for fall protection when it comes to the railroad because it's under OSHA. It's basically in a building or a structure, and that's where it's found under 1910, I believe, Eric. But I can follow up on that if later on. But right now, it's basically back under OSHA.
Okay, and that's very helpful. So thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
This one goes back a little bit to that question two times ago. I'm just going to read it right out. So are tack weld drive screw/rivet stops required on a manway eye-bolt shipping hazmat commodity?
So another great question. If we look in the requirements about an eye-bolt, and that would be, again, in the C3 manual, there really is no federal or regulatory requirement for an eye bolt to have any type of stop on the top of the eye bolt that prevents the nut from coming off. Surprisingly enough, because I think we all see that virtually every eye bolt has some sort of, tack weld, pin, rivet, or something that stops the nut from coming off and getting lost. What happens, though, is that the car builders have elected to design their eye bolts in this way, and in some cases suppliers of eye bolts as well. So when the car is built and the drawings are submitted to the AAR for approval, all this ultimately gets put on the certificate of construction. So once that item is listed on the certificate of construction as being approved for that car, now that car must stay compliant to the original drawings through the life of that car or until the point where the car owner makes some changes officially with the AAR today, which would be processed through the PCID website.
Wonderful. Thank you on that. So I think we're going to wrap it up. That's going to be the end of our Q&A. I would like to remind everyone that a replay will be available this Friday, July 28th. We will send out an email once that replay is ready. So please don't hesitate to follow up with Dave or Gino or anyone on the AllTranstek or FTR teams if you need anything. Thank you, Dave and Gino, for joining us today. Thank you so much for everyone. We're delighted that you guys were able to do this. Thanks, everyone, for attending. I hope you all have a fantastic day and a wonderful week. This concludes our webinar.